Good morning, everyone. It's Madeline with Together SC. Thank you for joining us this morning. We have a terrific program planned. I want to tell you a little bit about it, and then I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. You know, South Carolina hasn't had a long history of corporate leaders that operate at the national and even global scale, but we do these days. Many of our banks, but also Boeing and Volvo, many corporate leaders in our state are now part of the global world. And that is an exciting opportunity for our state, but it's also an opportunity for us as nonprofit leaders to understand the world in which they're working in, how they're measuring their success, and what they're focusing on. So I like to say that Together SC is peer-led, and this workshop is an absolute example of that. When I first met Ethel and she started talking to me about sustainable development goals, I had no idea what she was talking about. And I had to go look them up and figure it out. But you know how it is when you hear someone share something and then everyone you talk to seems to be talking about the same thing? And that was the case with SDGs. That after talking to Ethel and hearing what Sustain SC was focusing on, it seemed everyone I talked to was in fact using SDGs to measure their work. And I said, well, if I don't know about them, are there other nonprofit leaders that don't know about this opportunity to focus our work, to collaborate, and to measure effectively? And so I asked Ethel if she would help share with you. And she said, well, if we're going to do this, I've got to bring in Pam Martin. And then Melissa Furr from Blackbaud was wonderful enough to jump on and give it so she can give us the corporate perspective. But let me tell you a little bit about Ethel. She started Sustain SC 21, Ethel, is that what it was?
Yes, so we came with our public brand out in March of 2021. I've been in this space for 8 years, but that's when we came out with Sustain SC.
Yeah, when you look at your background, Ethel, it's almost as if everything you had done to that point in time was to prepare you for doing this. Yes. The relationships you built, the expertise you had, you know, so for the founders out there, there's a great founder story and what Ethel's doing. But also, if you go to her website, the very first page says, why Sustain SC? And she's got an amazing graphic. I think it starts in 1890 with 1 million people in South Carolina, and it looks to 2050 when we could have 10 million people in South Carolina.
You're going to see the graphic real quick.
Oh, good. I don't want to give away your story, but it's just a great example of up and right there saying why what you aim to do is important to do. And Pam comes at this from a terrific background, the academic side, if you will. And Pam, you've been working at Coastal Carolina and others for a number of years. She started what was then RISE Georgetown in 2017 and recently dropped the Georgetown because in fact you're working with nonprofits and corporations throughout the coastal region and perhaps throughout the state. So that vision of where you're going and your effort, we're going to hear about. And then finally, Melissa, for those of you that don't know Melissa from Blackbaud, she is their global social responsibility manager. And as a publicly traded company, that's an important role for the company to make sure they fill properly. She comes at this work from a background with nonprofits. Thank you very much, Melissa, for that, and philanthropic giving and volunteering, and even working in the municipal sector. But, you know, many of us have loved working with Blackbaud, not only because of their software resources, but because they are a thought leader in our sector. And it's pretty exciting to have a thought leader, a national global thought leader, and for the nonprofit sector, working out of and headquartered in Charleston. So with that, Ethel, let me thank you all for being with us today and turn it over to you, and we'll get started.
Great. Well, Madeline, thank you for having me, and I'm loving seeing everybody. Lots of friends joining today, so very excited to be here. I just wanted to give a quick background, very quick overview of Sustain SC and what our mission is and how we arrived at using the Sustainable Development Goals as really the framework and our kind of North Star of where we want to see South Carolina going. So Sustain SC, our mission is to connect the sustainability goals of business in South Carolina with local solutions. And all of this really work to benefit the economy, the environment, and the people of South Carolina. And this is the graphic that Madeline was referring to that is on our website, I think. But when we really look at South Carolina, we look at it from the makeup of 20 million acres, or just under 21 million acres, and 5.2 million in population. And that took us 290 years to get here. And we are forecasted to more than double that population in the next 60 years. So folks, our Southern charm has been found, and people are flocking to the state. And forestry, agriculture, tourism are really what are driving our economy. They are all leading our economy and very, very much reliant on our natural resource-based infrastructure as well as our quality of life. But we are also bookended by Boeing and Michelin. So Boeing in the Low Country, Michelin in the upstate, and in between, you're going to find 1,200 global companies. So we are very heavily led industrial state. And within these companies, you may be hearing that they are all very committed to being net zero, to being zero waste to landfill, to being water positive, committed to environmental justice goals. And this presents an enormous opportunity for the state of South Carolina, because the way Sustain SC is really viewing this is through an economic development lens. We are seeing a real transition from the industrial revolution to the sustainable revolution. And the demand all of our companies are having are creating opportunity to bring new economic innovation into the state. So whether that is new emerging energy, renewable energy resources, whether that is carbon capture, sustainable ag practices, the next billion-dollar companies are going to be those companies that are really transitioning to green economic innovation. And so that is where we see an opportunity to meet the demand of our companies with the supply, bringing in new jobs, new investments, but at the same time reducing the company's footprint. On the flip side of that, we also want them offsetting their footprint here. And so that is working on carbon offsets at the local level, working on water positive opportunities at the local level. And we're launching a land and water action fund with our private companies to conserve our most valuable resources. But all of these companies are using the SDGs as the framework of measuring their goals. So we really look at the E in the ESG framework. So we are looking at their sustainability goals when we look at the SDGs. And what really happened for Sustain SC and why this framework is what we chose is at COP26, the Department of Commerce sent me there. That is the Climate Accord Conference. And what we saw was 400 financial institutions led by Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, come around $130 trillion worth of assets, all of which was going to be contributed to climate transition. And what they were saying as shareholders to their companies was that climate transition is not a nice to have, it's a have to have. And Brian Moynihan uses the SDGs in all of his comments as the North Star, the compass, the framework to measure their goals by. So this really transitioned to being led by the financial institutions and the companies. And that model works back to South Carolina. So we look at Sustain SC as a global to local model. And so we really started researching member companies of ours and understanding, okay, the SDGs as they relate back to the United Nations, how can we bring that vernacular back to our state? And what we realized was every one of our member companies and their supply chain was using that framework. I highlight Blackball today because I'm sure Melissa is going to be a future member of Sustain SCs after today, but Blackball is a leader, and you'll hear from Melissa in using this framework, not only in their own reporting, but they have software that helps you today that will be a tangible walk away from you that you can use to measure as a nonprofit your own SDGs. But our companies like Milliken and Company, homegrown South Carolina companies are using this SDG framework, Sunoco, homegrown global companies, as well as utilities. They're using the SDGs, Boeing using the SDGs, Atlantic Packaging, privately held packaging company in Charleston, using the SDG framework, Avison and Young, a commercial developer. Again, Volvo, you would expect our European companies to use it. But this kind of gives you an idea, Schaeffler being a supplier of BMWs, all of the companies in the state are using this framework as a way to quantitatively and qualitatively tell their stories of how they're going to reach the goals that their investors, their shareholders, their consumers, and their employees are demanding. So came back from COP26, and what came out was the United States report towards our SDG goals. And as you can see here, South Carolina was ranking 37th out of 50 states towards our SDGs. The issue here is we know if we're going to compare ourselves to California or to some of these other states with higher regulation, we would understand we may not be reporting quite as well towards the SDGs. However, our competing states for retaining and attracting industry are out competing us towards these rankings. So Sustain SC has partnered with Ernst & Young, and we have launched an SDG pilot around the 6 SDGs that match our mission: affordable and clean energy, responsible consumption and production, clean water and sanitation, climate action, industry innovation and infrastructure, and life on land. And EY is digging into the indicators and targets behind these goals, understanding the data, the baseline, and understanding how we can create actionable strategies that will actually elevate South Carolina's ranking towards the SDGs. Because as I said before, this is a competitiveness strategy, and all companies are going to be looking at that score when they're choosing somewhere to go. But also in retaining these industries, if we are not behind these goals, giving them the needs that they have, it's going to become a retention issue, not just an attraction issue. So really from Sustain SC's perspective, this is an economic development conversation. So when we are the first state, so I want you to hear this again, that is using this framework to start to elevate our ranking. This will be scaled nationally. But it's very interesting. I just got back from Climate Week last week, how much interest we're getting as a state to really be using this framework and this compass for our own state to try to put ourselves on the map. So be proud as a South Carolinian, and as nonprofits, I think it's extremely exciting that Madeline is introducing you all, because Sustain SC feels like Together SC, with all of your missions, is going to be a great glue to start to look at these other SDGs, no poverty, no hunger, and really using this framework together, all of us, to try to elevate the state. So I hope you will join us. But as I transitioned to Dr. Martin, I knew very quickly that I was a mile wide and an inch deep in this. So I immediately found a unicorn in our state. She doesn't always love when I call her this, but someone who's extremely well-rounded and has been working in the SDGs before the SDGs were cool. She's worked in Ecuador, she's worked in the Galapagos, she's worked with MIT, and she's our own South Carolinian. So I immediately, once I found her, I've not let her go. She's become the Sustain SC Fellow. So she's going to really, as I kind of gave you the high level view of how our companies are using these as their North Star. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Martin and really learn how she's been using these and really what the SDGs are. So, Pam?
Thanks so much, Ethel. And I want to thank Madeline, everyone at Together SC for inviting us today. And I don't mind the unicorn. I hope I can live up to it. And I look forward to talking to everyone today. I want to point out we are still Georgetown Rise in Georgetown. And Madeline, sorry, Ethel, you can go to the next slide, please, and thank you. In fact, Georgetown Rise is a United Nations Regional Center of Expertise on Education for Sustainable Development. That is a mouthful. And so you have to practice your cardio in order to be able to say the title. And so we realized very quickly that we needed to have a title that made sense to us in South Carolina and in Georgetown County at the time. And now we call ourselves Advancing Resilience, Innovation, Sustainability, and Education. We are now transitioning to RISE because, as Ethel said, I am a fellow, and Sustain SC has partnered with Coastal Carolina University and our RISE Center to work on a very exciting work on the SDG pilot study, and something that I hope everyone at Together SC will join us for some of our training and workshops on the SDGs. The SDGs are just as important, it may be more important for nonprofits, and I'll go into why. But I want to also point out that nonprofits were a big part of the history and the foundation of the Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, nonprofits partnered with the private sector and formed something called the Global Compact, which is the non-country side of the Sustainable Development Goals, which means in the United Nations, when the Sustainable Development Goals were passed in the General Assembly in 2015, they were passed by countries because it's only countries that are in the General Assembly. And yet the Secretary General of the United Nations realized very quickly, well, who are the doers? I think Together SC knows who the doers are. The doers are the nonprofit sector and private industry. And so how do we get on the ground with these very important goals to move our planet forward? And they tapped into the strength of the nonprofit sector through the Global Compact. So these are our RISE Center. It goes by RCE. The UN calls it RCEs. We partner with the Bunnell Foundation, so I just want to shout out to the Bunnell Foundation, the Coastal Community Foundation, the National Estuarine Research Reserve, Six Axis Manufacturing. Many of these nonprofits and private sector have supported our RISE work. What is the goal of an RCE? RCEs connect local communities to the global goals. And as I always say, these goals are global. And when you read the targets and indicators, you're going to see a lot of wording about developing countries. But if you cannot attain the goals in Georgetown County or Colleton County or Berkeley County or Charleston County, then we are not obtaining the global goals. So it's just as important on a local level that we work toward these goals. And so I know that the nonprofit sector is very familiar with a collective impact model, and that's what the RCE does. And there is a global action plan in the United Nations to engage these goals, and that global action plan specifically calls out localizing the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you. Next slide. So look at where we are. We are located we started in Georgetown County. We're based in Georgetown County and in Horry County, our RISE Center. And you see that we're now among a number of almost 200 other centers around the world. This means that our partnership through the RISE Center and the UN RCE network with Sustain SC connects us not just to South Carolina, but to other networks all over the world. And those networks provide for us opportunities to share information, to conduct research, to not essentially recreate the wheel. And I just want to point out, as Ethel pointed out, not only is South Carolina the first among states to do an SDG study, but our little RISE Center, which I guess we can say our behemoth RISE Center in South Carolina here, has every year won the award for most outstanding project in education for sustainable development. in the United Nations. So we are spotlighted on a global level. Next slide, please. You may be wondering, okay, sustainable development is one of those terms that it has kind of been overused over the years, but it's really about balanced decision making. How do we do the 3 Ps, right? The people, prosperity, and planet. Whoops, says plan, but I should have put planet there. The triple bottom line, the environmental, the economic, and the social. How do we find that sweet spot in the middle? Because we know if we have hungry children in school, we know that they won't be successful in schools. That will impact economics in a community. We know when we have unclean water in a community, impacts the health of our children, which impacts the economic development of our communities right here in South Carolina and around the world. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, this is a lot of words on a page, but I'm going to say that in my lifetime, which I'd like to say is sort of short, but it's not, we just started the term sustainable development. And it was only in 1972 that the world came together in Stockholm for a conference on the human environment, thinking about how humans and our environment work together. And in 1987 is when the term was coined. Before the SDGs, we had the Millennium Development Goals. And the SDGs are a product of those goals, because what we learned from the Millennium Development Goals process is that it was the industrialized world telling the developed world what they had to do in the Millennium Development Goals. And the US, by the way, this was much of it was done under President Bush Jr. And so G.W. Bush, and we were very successful. The UN supported that quite a bit. But now the Sustainable Development Goals were developed after the Rio +20 summit in 2012 with all of the world together. That includes nonprofits and the private sector plus countries. This is the largest initiative the world has ever seen to push us forward. Next slide, please. So here we have the 17 goals, and you can see the top line. And many of your organizations are dealing with these goals, and I'm going to show you how you are dealing with these goals. But the top line essentially are social goals. The middle line are the economic goals, and the bottom line are the environmental goals. However, as all of you know, as nonprofits working in a community, systems level thinking and holistic integrated processes are imperative. So having a sustainable community, goal 11, means that we do need quality education and good health, as well as infrastructure that is sustainable, and protection of our water, our land, and partnerships. And I think Together SC and Sustain SC are just fine examples of goal 17, partnerships for the goals. Next slide, please. Here's an example. There's not just, so you may say, okay, you've got goals, that's pretty easy. But it goes more, it goes further than that. And I think that it's really important. This is just an example of one of the 17 goals, no poverty. It has targets. And there you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, a multitude of targets. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see all of the indicators. So what happens is, as an organization, you can select the goals that make sense for your organization. Then you select the targets. And in South Carolina, we may define some of those targets differently, because poverty for us looks different than poverty in, let's say, Rwanda or in Bolivia. And so the idea of this process is that we internalize these goals and targets, and then we make indicators that make sense to us, and we localize those. And that's the value added for nonprofit and private sector organizations, is that you can use this framework to not only work toward global progress together, but you can use it to work towards your strategic planning, because it's a process that is transparent and it makes you accountable because it's a measurable outcomes framework. Next slide, please. And so here, I want to give you two examples. I don't have the Coastal Community Foundation's work completed, but I want to shout out to Samuel and Darren Goss and Edie and everyone at Coastal Community Foundation. I've been talking with Darren and Samuel and Edie, but definitely Darren, for years about the Sustainable Development Goals, and Ethel is right, way before they were cool. And Darren definitely was wondering what was wrong with me, that I kept saying the 3 letters SDG. But I think he's finally drank the Kool-Aid, and we are working on a very exciting study with the Coastal Community Foundation. They are path-breaking and pioneering. They have chosen 6 sustainable development goals to measure in 10 counties in South Carolina. They're aligning their strategic planning with it. And importantly, they have partnered with some of the nonprofits, including United Ways, Black River United Way, Trident United Way, Horry County United Way. We had a number of meetings where we looked at the goals. We chose the goals together. We aligned those goals with the strategic planning of the various United Ways and with Coastal Community Foundation. We also then, sorry, I've got beeping going on. We also then made indicators that made sense for those organizations. What were they doing on the ground? Literacy dashboard for the 6 goals for the Coastal Community Foundation. And that will help them then look at, instead of funding and creating initiatives and projects that aren't based on data, they are now going to be data driven and accountable and transparent through this dashboard. And we can look at that year over year and make changes to it. It's a very exciting process. So thank you to everyone at CCF. This slide here shows something that Habitat for Humanity. I work very closely, shout out to Laura Gassler and everyone in Georgetown County Habitat. They support our youth corps where we have students intern in Georgetown County. This is an example. Habitat International measures the goals. And it's important to understand that a lot of your nonprofits at a global level, United Way is another one, at national level, are measuring these goals because their funding is based on it. Banks, foundations are in their grant applications are asking how you fulfill the goals. And Laura and I have talked about this at Habitat. This is an example of Habitat globally and the goals they focus on. And here I think it's a great example of how the goals are interrelated, integrated, and how they have direct and indirect impact in communities just from one nonprofit organization. Next slide, please. With my students, I also, we started a new sustainability and coastal resilience major at Coastal Carolina University, just started in January, so just in 2022. And it's exciting because communities are, many communities feel the impact. Hello, Hurricane Ian is on our heels. Hopefully not, but we're looking at it certainly. And many communities in South Carolina are looking at the impacts of our changing climate and their environments and saying, okay, how can we as a local community measure our sustainability and become more resilient in the face of some challenges? Next slide, please. Murrells Inlet took a chance on me and on the students, and we created a framework. I particularly show you this framework because you don't have to measure the goals the way that you see them in the boxes. You can actually rearrange them like building blocks. And the way that communities oftentimes, and I would say that this is important, in South Carolina, we are a treasure trove of natural resources. We are immersed in them, and no better place than Murrells Inlet. If you haven't been there, you need to go to look at how important that inlet, that water, those wetlands, those fish stocks are to the livelihoods of the people there, for tourism, for fishing, for oysters that we enjoy. And so there you can see a model that we built based on the Sustainable Development Goals. And then we chose specific targets and indicators. We did that in 2021. We're remeasuring it now in 2022. Next slide, please. Here's an example. Bunnell Foundation, thank you, Giles, and everyone at the Bunnell Foundation has sponsored us now. We are in our 5th year, about to go into our 6th year of our UN Youth Corps. We have students, we have 35 students interning throughout Georgetown County in various public and private organizations, and then they measure the goals to those organizations. And the reason why I show you this slide is it doesn't matter if you're public, private, small, nonprofit, everyone can measure these goals and show year over year progress. This is a student, Sandra, and she worked at Mercom, which has now been bought out by Fed Data, and she looked at these goals. Next slide, please. Because she's looking at the impacts of remote work. Next slide, please. And you can see there that she talks about how remote work affects economic growth, partnerships, and industry and innovation uniquely. And remote work is a really, COVID, what happened before COVID, but it seems to have now multiplied during COVID. And so all communities, but Georgetown County is trying to get a handle on how is remote work impacting our economic development. So there you can see through one private sector company, we can do a study and through the goals and look at those impacts. Next slide, please. Here's an example of the Village Group. I have full bias on this because I sit on the board of the Village Group and I support them, but we have students that intern there, and they had a culturally embedded, Gullah Geechee culturally embedded STEM education program on flood resilience. My student Caitlin worked on this, but here you can see even nonprofits can measure the goals and measure their impact. So you might want to just start by choosing a program that you have as opposed to your entire organization. There are different ways to measure sustainability in your organization, and certainly Sustain SC. Ethel and I would be glad to talk to you about that in our training. Next slide, please. The last thing one of the last things I'd like to show you is what happens then collectively as organizations in Together SC as you start the Black River United Way. I want to apologize. For some reason, the colors did not come up on that top line, but Black River United Way does a lot with the SDGs in our community. Here's an example of you can show your collective impact on the goals in specific areas, and you can also see where you're weak. Like you can't probably see that, but I know that the column that is red that has no little colors in it is gender equality. Thanks, Ethel. And so that means that all those organizations, we missed gender equality. So maybe collectively we need to think about how are we serving gender equality in the future when we're thinking about programs. It's a fantastic way to map collective progress, but also individual progress. Next slide, please. And I just want to say thank you, and I will toss it over to Melissa.
Hi, well, good morning, everybody. Ethel and Pamela, thank you. I was taking notes as both of you were speaking. I actually have some good ideas to take back to my own team. It's really great to be with everybody this morning. Thank you for the invitation to join this conversation. I have been with Blackbaud for 3 years now. My role with the company is the Global Social Responsibility Manager. And what that effectively means is that it's my job to engage all 3,600 or so of our employees in giving back through our volunteerism programs, our grant making programs, and our give back benefits. And to work in partnership with my team and our VP of Social Responsibility to make sure that Blackbaud is giving back and being a good corporate steward in the communities where we have a presence, especially. And for those who may not be as familiar with Blackbaud, Blackbaud is the leading cloud software provider for the social good sector. And I like to break that down into plain English just by saying that we serve a lot of social good organizations like faith-based, universities, nonprofits, corporations as well, in helping them advance their mission and do good in the world through our tech solutions that we provide. And Blackbaud is, I'm going to boast on Blackbaud for a little while. Blackbaud is committed to governing its business in a sustainable way, in an ethical way, and investing in communities where we have a presence, where our employees are living and working. And we do that by tracking, we track that basically and report on it. Our most recent report, our sustainability report, was released in April of this year. It's available on our website in case anyone is curious to go in there and take a look at that. And I saw a question in the chat earlier about the difference between ESG and SDG. And so I thought I would go ahead and just touch on that briefly. So Blackbaud actually tracks its impact across the SDGs, but also by using something called environmental, social, and governance, also known as ESG metrics. And what that is basically a set of standards that socially conscious investors and others use to assess how a company is performing in certain environmental, social, and governance issues. So to break that down into a very practical example, I mentioned volunteerism earlier. So all of our employee volunteerism at the company and our give back programs, all of those metrics that we measure and collect around those key areas would roll up into the S in ESG because those are social issues that we're impacting there. Governance would, of course, be how our board is led and how it's comprised and run. And then environmental, of course, would be what is our carbon footprint? We're very happy that we have gone carbon neutral. That's a newer announcement this year. So those three, E, S, and G, environmental, social, and governance, are sort of broader ways of measuring a company's impact. But back to SDGs, we have, as a company, I think Ethel may have mentioned this, we have joined the United Nations Global Compact. Last year, we joined that. And as part of that commitment, and I'll just reiterate, it's basically a call to companies everywhere to align their operations and strategies with 10 key principles in the area of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. And as part of that, to take action in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's something we've committed to by joining the Global Compact and recommitted to every year. All right, so to start, I kind of want to just dive into how we use the SDGs on my team to assess and analyze our impact across our philanthropic giving. And there's a lot of ways that we do that informally and formally. And I really appreciated Pamela's call out about how the impact can be direct and it can be indirect. And we've certainly looked at it that way as well, because so many of our initiatives sort of, they touch across different multiple SDGs. And it's really just up to you to kind of look at the work that you're doing and assess where does it best fit into which SDG, and is it a direct impact or an indirect one? And we've certainly had that conversation internally. So one of the things we like to do is we like to take a look at our employee giving. We like to assess, are there maybe top 3 areas where our employees are donating? That's good to know. Like what is, and it changes year over year because, you know, our employee force has changed. I mean, we went from 3,000 employees to 3,600, I think, over the span of the past couple of years, and there's been lots of ebbs and flows in hiring. And that will change the makeup of, you know, what your employee base is giving to. And so we're able to do that. We can also break down volunteerism. We can look at all of the charities that our employees are volunteering with and what are the top 3 or 5 SDGs that are being impacted through those charities. And then that helps us do things like for our week of caring or, you know, a service month. We know what cause areas are going to be really particularly popular with those employees because we know what the top 3 causes are, you know, based on our assessment. So we use that data in a very practical way. And then also as a company, you know, we look at our overall philanthropic giving. We're able to go in and see the classification for, you know, let's say we make a gift to, you know, a charity that is directly addressing hunger. Well, it's pretty clear which SDG that fits into. We're able to classify that gift according to that SDG, and we know we've made an impact there. So we're able to look at all of our giving across the board for a year and see what does the spread look like? Where are we making an impact? And we can, of course, also look at that according to geography too, which is another way to sort of splice the data for us. We're unique in the sense that at Blackbot, we don't necessarily lift up and champion 1 or 2 or even 3 causes. That is by default because of what we do as a company and the fact that we support so many social good organizations across so many different verticals and cause areas that we could never choose just one. It would be impossible. What we pride ourselves on is touching as many cause areas as we can. So our assessment might be a bit unique in that we're looking at our philanthropic investments across the board and seeing where is there a gap? Where have we not made an investment through volunteerism or corporate giving or our matching gift programs? And where do we need to focus to lift that up even more? Additionally, we rely on, I guess this is a good segue sort of into how to track maybe, because I can talk about how we do that as a company. It's really important to have a system for tracking, for any company to have a system for tracking their impact against the SDGs. And we, of course, use our own software, which allows us to pull reports, essentially, that let me see of all the giving in 2021, what SDGs do they link up to. And we can do that with our volunteerism as well. And then we do that across all of our grant making and all of our philanthropic giving outside of grant making. So there's lots of different buckets of philanthropy, and it's my job to kind of go in and look and see within each of those buckets, what SDGs are we making an impact in, whether directly or indirectly. And then as a whole, across all of these different types of philanthropic giving and investment, where are we moving the needle as a company? And then that type of information is what typically shows up in our social responsibility report, which we issue annually. In 2020, I think it was 2020, our top 3, for example, were no poverty, peace, justice, strong institutions, that one always seems to show up, and good health and well-being, which makes sense given the times, right? Everything that was happening from 2019 to 2021, that's going to be the trend, right? Good health and well-being and social justice, 2 key areas of investment across the corporate sector. And then I'm just going to talk briefly about this. I think most companies to kind of provide, so I've told you a little bit about how we use it as a team at Blackbaud to assess our own giving and the impact that we're making. But I want to speak just a little bit about how we've seen just sort of trends in how the corporate sector is using SDGs as a measure of their impact, and specific to those that are sort of using our products, right? So for those grant makers and those who are using our product that is all about employee engagement, volunteerism, and giving, they are able to, in that software, they're able to see all of their activity matched up to an SDG, right? So it's a framework that comes with the software that allows corporate users to be able to connect with nonprofits, because when a nonprofit is a part of that software, they're automatically given a classification of what SDG they align with. That's part of being in the database. And so that facilitates more connections between the corporate users of that product and the nonprofits that are listed in that database. And if they're needing, for example, they're wanting to do grant making around 2 or 3 specific cause areas, they will be able to go in and see what are the organizations doing work in this specific region in that area. So it's facilitating stronger connections, easier connections as well. And I don't know, Madeline, if you'd like, I'd be happy to share the SDG connector tool. I know it's linked. I don't know if we want to do like a screen share and just kind of walk through that. I don't know if we have time. But if anybody on the call is kind of wondering what SDG which ones do I line up with? How could I find this out? There is a tool available to help you with that.
Melissa, that's so funny. I literally just put, can you talk about whether the nonprofit classifies themselves or you classify them in that process? So I think if we've got time, let's go on. Well, let's do this. I don't see a lot of questions in the chat box, but go on. If you've got questions, let's put the questions in the chat box and see if there are any that people want to get answered before they have to jump off. And then we can go to the tool in case we go over a little bit. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyone besides me have questions? You know me, guys, I always have questions. So, but if you got questions, please share them now. I did want to give Samuel a chance to speak a little bit about the Coastal Community Foundation work. Samuel, if you wanted to come off mute and share a little bit about that in case you have to leave.
Yeah, sure. I did see Susan had a question if you wanted to get her question first, or
I think that one goes back to Melissa. So
okay.
Melissa, take a look at that and we'll come to that after your comments, Sam. I'm sorry,
It's okay. Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to be on with you guys this morning. For those who don't know about the Coastal Community Foundation, we're a local organization in the Low Country that works to create communities rich in equity, opportunity, and well-being. And we do that by investing resources in the community through endowed giving. So the project that Dr. Martin was talking about earlier, we are in the process of creating a data dashboard that will focus our 10 counties near the coast in South Carolina. So Berkeley, Beaufort, Charleston, Colleton, Dorchester, Georgetown, Hampton, Horry, Jasper, and Allendale. And our mission is really simple. I mean, we want to use data to tell our impact story. We believe that data is a combination between both expert knowledge and community knowledge. So we want to provide this dashboard to basically give us a framework for storytelling and narrative shaping. And our goal is really just to make the data easily accessible and understandable. And how we will use this tool is really to allow grant makers to assist them in making decisions about where and how to invest. So we are focused on a number of different SDG targets and indicators, no poverty, zero hunger, health and well-being, quality education, of course, decent work and economic growth, sustainable cities and communities, and then climate change. So our goal is really just to make sure that not only that we have the information, but that the donors that we work with have the information to kind of direct where they invest, but also use that information as a capacity building tool for organizations that are looking to work in different areas to help kind of guide, be guardrails on a highway, if you will, on the type of organizations that they start or that they collaborate and partner with. So that's a little bit of the work that we're doing at CCF around the dashboards. And
Samuel, can you share one sort of aha or story about the impact this has had on the work that you're doing? Is there any sort of
so we're in the early stages of it, but I will say that one of the most significant aha moments is that everybody is looking into creating some sort of dashboard. We've been, we don't like to duplicate work. So we've been having conversations with organizations across the state around data collection, around the SDGs, and just what a dashboard would look like, how it would be feasible for the organizations, what collaboration would look like on a dashboard, what organizations would want to see, what information they would use to make decisions, to determine whether or not the efforts that they're doing is impactful. And I think just through those conversations, we've gleaned a considerable amount of community knowledge about what's working, what's not working, and really where we're falling short as a philanthropic community, and where we need to invest dollars. I mean, that's really the most significant aha, that there's more work to be done and more bridges to be built.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. I see Susan has come on the screen, Melissa. So let's get that question answered and then we'll jump to the tool.
Sure.
Does that sound okay with you, Ethel? Okay. Susan, you asked, how do we go about applying to be one of the nonprofits to be considered? Do you mean by Blackbaud? I think she,
yes, I do. I'm sure I can just look it up. I'm sure it's on there, but since I was in here, so I feel kind of bad I even asked, but
you're asking about the grant making process.
Yes, exactly. And just, I'm sure it's all just on the website, but we've just been around, not yet 3 years. So we're kind of newer in trying to get more established, as we're all volunteer run organization, but we've done a lot. So we're like in this spot of wanting to grow. So we just need as much information as we can have to help us.
Melissa, do you want to refer to a website, or do you want to?
Well, I'll just go ahead and answer verbally because we don't actually have like a specific site on our webpages about this, but we do have a Community Matters Grants program in the US. Actually, it's in all 5 countries where we have employees. And we are actually about to commence our US East cycle. So I would say just send an email to Blackbaud Cares Center at blackbaud.com to get more information sent to you. That covers, as I mentioned, the US East, most of South Carolina, though I will say one caveat, because we do partner with the Coastal Community Foundation for one of our oldest grant programs. It serves the Tri-County area, Berkeley, Charleston, and Dorchester. So if you're located in the Tri-County area, you would want to actually instead go to the Coastal Community Foundation's website and look up the Blackbaud Fund. That's a separate, where we don't want to double dip. So we've got South Carolina, except for those 3 counties. We've got 2 separate grant programs running in South Carolina specifically. So hopefully that helps direct you one way or the other, Susan.
It makes me feel so old. I set up that Blackbaud Fund with Tony and John way back in the 90s when
It's such a great program, and it's something
Yeah.
we're very proud of. You know, it's definitely, and it's a great partnership with the Community Foundation as well.
Well, and it was an early example of engaging employees in the grant making, decision-making process. And
Yes.
back before others were doing it, now so many do it. But y'all really have led on that, like so many issues. Okay, so folks, I think what we're going to do is ask Melissa to share the tool. I think you've got permission with your screen. Ethel and
Okay.
Pam, can you stay on to provide commentary on how it works? But for those that are going to choose to jump off, if this isn't what you need, thank you for being here today. I do want to say that this is a direction we hope to build upon, particularly as part of our summit in March in 2023. So you can be looking for more on how corporations are using it, how philanthropic partners are using it, what we as nonprofits need to be doing, because it really does seem like it is rapidly becoming a universal language that we as nonprofits need to be able to understand and speak in order to collaborate with our governmental and corporate partners in this work. So look for more on it, and thank you to our amazing speakers, all of you, and Samuel, thank you for jumping in. Okay, so go on and leave, and now let's go to the SDG connector. Take it away, Melissa.
Yes, I'll just briefly show, this is our SDG connector homepage. This is free and accessible to anyone, and it is your guide to understanding which SDG you align with and your mission and the work of your organization. And within that, what key indicators you could be tracking and reporting on, and to Samuel's point, all data which helps you eventually convert into a strong and compelling story that you can tell to your donors, to your supporters, to your volunteers, and to put on your website. So what I've done here is I've just selected from a drop-down menu a cause area, environment and animals, pretending that I'm a nonprofit serving in that area. And then from there, is it animal related? Is it environmental? I've chosen environment, and then it helps filter down for you which SDGs may most directly match your mission and your work. And from there, that's where you would click on each of these to get a deeper sense of what does that mean? What are we talking about with good health and well-being? And what are the targets and indicators that are being measured by the United Nations? And what are some of these that you may already be, the light bulb might go off and be like, we're already measuring that. We're already making an impact in that. Or we could measure this, but we're not. And that could be a part of our story moving forward.
So there's so many issues. And I mean, the one you just picked in terms of good health and well-being, these targets, there's nothing here about seniors. There's nothing here about mental illness I didn't see. I mean, what about groups that don't find a target or metric for the work they're doing? Do you just—
Madeline, let me just say that would be impossible.
It's impossible.
Okay.
That would be impossible. Seniors are included in a number of those metrics. In fact, you can Google it. There's an entire SDG report on aging populations. When we started Georgetown Rise, we actually had a group of people in Georgetown County that were concerned about sustainable and affordable housing, maybe co-housing in the county for people as they age. And there's even a report on that. So,
Wow.
and you can measure it. Mental health is a big part. In fact, that's something that we talked about with the CCF study. Mental health, we are looking at mental health though from the optic not of elderly, but of school-aged children in light of the pandemic. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't measure it. The other thing is those targets, I just want to compliment Melissa and Blackbaud on creating such a useful tool. It's how you use the tool and facilitate the tool that really matters, though. And I know that Ethel and I would be happy to engage in that further, but you can use that two ways. You can use that to tell your story to the outside world, or to form your story inside your organization, and or both. And I think together SC, what could be exciting is, Melissa pointed out that you may already be measuring that. Well, what if like half of or 70% of your membership were already measuring something? You could measure it together, and together demonstrate your collective change. And that's a really powerful story for your organization.
Well, and we could absolutely use it to try and code the members and the geography they serve, so that people, when someone comes to start a nonprofit, the first thing we say is scan the environment, figure out whether you need a new nonprofit or whether you can work with someone that's already there. But this might make that scanning process even easier, because right now you're sort of scanning on keywords,
And I want to add to that, because I think, Madeline, when we first met about this, what I think I found most valuable about Together SC and having the entire forum of the nonprofit community across the state, and Sustain SC, if we're trying to elevate the ranking, you all of you have amazing goals within your organizations. And to Pam's point, every one of those are covered in the SDGs. And I think if you think back to Pam's slide, where she was taking those nonprofits and mapping where we're hitting, I think Together SC really can become that kind of synergy where we're all feeding the data into one platform to show how the state is moving forward. And that's elevating our state, not just one cause. And they're all overlapping in so many ways, but I definitely.
Yeah, I mean, even being able to use the data from, for just the specific one. I mean, we're with a voice for mental health, and to have others combine and, share that data to show more statistical things and stuff like that could be amazing, like to come up even with surveys and things. Sometimes it, when people are really willing to work together for the greater good, it's when we get so much to happen, and we don't feel as if we're in so much competition in the sense, that's the thing I think sometimes we have to be aware of, that we're all in this together for the greater good. And so that is, and these are great ideas. I didn't know a lot of this stuff, though. Thank you so much, you guys.
Excellent. Thank you. So we'll be sure to send that link to the Blackbaud tool in the follow-up email. And I'm really thinking, Melissa and Pam, there's a session on this at the summit, but in terms of how to use it and go deep on it. Lots of ideas are coming from this. Again, thank you all so very much. If folks have questions, feel free to sort of stay on. But I think we'll go on and stop the recording and thank our speakers.